Hey, we're in Haftarah Bakukotai. Not pronouncing that right, but it's Jeremiah 16, verse 19, all the way to chapter 17, verse 14. So last week we were also in Jeremiah. And if you remember, I kind of set you up for something this week. Last week I had you think about what Jeremiah had been prophesying, that at the conclusion of the doom and gloom and exile that was about to come upon Judah, that we have a future when all the nations of the world will come to the kingdom of Judah, which has been restored back to their place. The nations will come and exchange their false gods and the idols that they trusted in for intimately knowing and being known by the God of Israel. And I said we were going to cover this in more detail this week. So this Haftarah starts out right away with that. And it says, Lord, my strength and my fortress, my refuge in time of distress. To you the nations will come from the ends of the earth and say, our ancestors possessed nothing but false gods, worthless idols that did them no good. Do people make their own gods? Yes, but they're not gods. Therefore, I will teach them. This time I will teach them my power and might. Then they will know that my name is the Lord. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. So the prophecy is that when Judah and the nations make something other than God to be their trust and their strength, that doesn't go well for them. And that once they realize that, they will come looking for God. Now, the prophecy is that this happens on a grand scale in the future, but you and I think that we can look for and we can expect and we can anticipate and even work toward that happening in our personal lives, like now, today, because our risen Messiah makes this possible. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself with that. So let me kind of set the stage for that, okay? So in the Haftarah, we have this visible picture of a contrast between those who trust in something other than God and those who trust in God. And this is where we're going to kind of camp out on this lesson. We're going to look at one aspect of what it means to turn to God, the nations turning to God, in the sense of trusting in Him, okay? Now, the tie-in between the Torah portion and the Haftarah this week is going to give us a little bit more pieces of this puzzle. So the Torah portion this week talks about the blessings that come to those who trust God and the curses for those who don't. And then our Haftarah kind of gives a picture of what those curses are that come to those who don't trust in God. So both in the Torah portion and the Haftarah, we get this contrast between something called a blessing and something called a curse. Blessings and curses. Now, there's so much more that can be said about blessings and curses than what I'm going to cover today. But we can think of blessings as an unbinding of the things that restrict you, okay? Unbinding of the things that restrict you. And if that sounds super spiritual, let me take you down a path that definitely is not super spiritual. So when I think of what it means Hebraically to bless, the image that I have in mind is literally a rope that is tied around somebody. So like their arms are tied and their legs are tied maybe to a chair. They can't get out, right? Now here's the silly part. This is why I'm going to explain why I have this image that comes up for this. So I grew up on the cartoon called The Rocky and Bullwinkle Show. And one of the segments was Dudley Do-Right. He was a Canadian Mountie who was always pitted against the villain, whose name was Snidely Whiplash. Now, Snidely was always wanting to harm little Nellie. So Dudley Do-Right had to rescue her. I mean, probably, I think pretty much every episode, every show, this little cartoon. So Snidely, evil Snidely, he would tie Nellie up to the train tracks with this big thick rope with this ongoing train approaching. And Dudley had to swoop in kind of at the last minute. He always bungled things, but he ended up being able to untie or unbind her and free her to safety. Okay. Now, yes, that's kind of a weird. We think that we think the cartoons today are violent, you know. And in your lesson, I've given you a link so you can go onto YouTube and you can see a little snippet of the show if you're curious about that. But the image stuck with me, right? Dudley Do-Right, when he unties Nellie and frees her, he's blessing her. He unbinds her. He unravels the things that are restricting her. And that's a really good picture of what it means to bless. So I want you to take this thought into your own life, okay? You're free to use your own image if this one doesn't work, but if you want, you can use this image. And so the question then is, what's the rope in your life, right? What's restricting you from thriving, from living to the full potential that God has given you and intends for you? So when you are blessed, Hebraically, those thick ropes are untied and you're set free. And so again, that's the image that I have for blessed, to unbind, to release a person from their limitations and their restrictions. And then being released, that allows that person to maximize their God-given potential and their destiny. And part of that potential and destiny then is to bless others. Okay? So let's talk about to curse. Well, to curse is what Snidely Whiplash does. That's the binding up. That's the limitation. That's the restriction. So a curse would be the things that cause a person to be bound up with restrictions and limitations. And then that would disallow their potential and their destiny. So a blessing is spoken to those who listen to God, Shema, and listen and do, right? And a curse is spoken to those who rebel and they willfully refuse to submit. So our Haftarah says that the one who trusts in something other than God for power and protection, they're going to be restricted. They're going to be limited. And it doesn't always mean that bad things will happen in their life, but it means that they've broken their connection with God. The connection that they have has become restricted and limited because they've separated themselves in their rebellion. They've separated themselves from the purposes of God. So let's talk about trust as it would have been understood to the original audience. Okay. Now, I'm going to present 3 maybe new Hebrew words for you, but I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to keep it short, and I'm going to keep it sweet. So stay with me, okay? So in this particular Haftarah, in chapter 7, verse 17, I'm going to read you this verse in 3 different translations, okay? The first one is the NIV. Blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. Okay, that's the NIV. King James says, blessed is the man that trusteth in the Lord, whose hope the Lord is. Now, I was reading in a new commentary by Robert Alter, It's called the Hebrew Bible, a translation with commentary. I think that's the name. And he translates that same verse this way. He says, "Blessed be the man who trusts the Lord, and the Lord becomes his trust." Okay? Now, I'm not going to bog you down with Hebrew syntax. Main reason because I don't quite speak Hebrew, and this is all kind of over my head. But I want to pull out a couple of things. I want to pull out the idea of the verb trust in the noun trust. Okay? In that translation, blessed be the man who trusts the Lord, verb, the Lord becomes his trust, noun. Now in Hebrew, the verb is batak and the noun is batak. Each have the same verbal root. Now we're going to talk about this verb batak for trust in just a minute, but I want to pull out one more little word, okay? In that last translation, it says the Lord becomes his trust. Now that word is haya, and that's the verb for to be, to become, to exist, to happen. In English, often we see it translated as is. Now, there's an important reason why I'm making this distinction. Back in our NIV, blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. In King James, blessed is the man that trusts the Lord, whose hope the Lord is. But in this Robert Alter's version, it pulls out the idea that the action is converted into a condition. Trusting, the action, does something specific. It gives rise to, it brings about, it generates, it creates, it provokes, it kindles trust. And this is typical Hebraic thought. I do something in order to become. I do something in order to become. So you've maybe heard the phrase, fake it till you make it. That doesn't really capture the beauty of doing in order to become, but it kind of helps us understand the importance of actively doing something over and over and over again. So when we do something over and over again, we're not only creating a habit, and habits are actually neural pathways in our brain that fire over and over and over again. But this repeated action, in this case of trusting, that kindles, creates trust. So again, in Robert Alter's translation, he's capturing this idea when he says the Lord becomes his trust. So if you act with trust based on God's character, that rubs off on you, and you discover that God becomes your source of security. And then, of course, Jeremiah wants us to know the flip side of this, is that if you don't act with confidence that God is trustworthy, then you won't find that security that you need. And we see that in verse 17:5, cursed be the man who trusts in humans and makes mortal flesh his strong arm. So what does trust look like Hebraically? To find out, we'll need to go back to that verb I mentioned before, which is batak. So when we think of the word trust in English, that's kind of an abstract word. And because of that, it's hard to really kind of pin down what it means. And if it's hard to pin down what it means, it's hard to do it, right? Apparently, the word trust appears 134 times in King James, but that's actually several different words in their original languages. And then if you just pick out Hebrew alone, like from the Tanakh, there's 4 different Hebrew words behind our English word trust. Again, we're just going to talk about the one that's in Jeremiah, and that's the word batak. Now, let me tell you why I'm going with the Hebrew here, okay? So, like I said, English is more of an abstract word meanings. And what I mean by that is that it cannot be, so if something's abstract, it can't be sensed by the five senses. But Hebrew is a more concrete language. And that means that every word is associated with something that can be sensed by one or more of the five senses. So each of the Hebrew words that's translated as trust has their own nuance of meaning, and we're going to look at batak. So batak expresses like the sense of well-being and security that comes from having someone or something to place your confidence in. But it has a more concrete meaning of to cling. All right. Now, what's interesting and really cool is that the word trust is related to the Hebrew word for melon. Okay, now think about a melon. It's a large fruit that clings to a really small vine. Okay, so when you picture that, that's something concrete. So we're looking for something that's going to demonstrate action, not just something that I mentally agree to. And that's the key to us understanding how knowing what trust means, how that can inform our own lives, right? So to say that I trust God, that means do something about it, not just think it. Now, the way that I like to, kind of the picture I have for that in my head, so a child who trusts her parents' waiting arms when she's taking her first jump into the swimming pool, when does she trust? Hebraically, she only trusts when she jumps, not when she's just thinking about it. Okay? So again, batak means to cling to. So that child jumping out has this anticipation of clinging, right? And it's also a picture of grafting in horticulture. So in grafting, you have the stalk of the original tree, and a little cut is made, and then the new tree is inserted into that, and then the gardener wraps that place where the two meet, and it strengthens everything until that joint becomes one. So that's another really good concrete image of this. And I think that's kind of what's behind Yeshua's words in John 15, where he says, abide in me and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself except it abide in the vine. No more can you except you abide in me. I'm the vine, you're the branch. He that abides in me and I in him, the same brings forth much fruit. For without me, you can do nothing. So abide is an interesting word as it relates to trust. It means to establish, to endure, to continue. So it describes something that doesn't come to an end. So to abide is to cling to God. But not only when you know that you don't have any other choice, but also clinging to God when you think, well, I could take care of myself. It's choosing to cling to him. Now, a lot of us maybe still struggle with what I call spiritual orphanhood mentality, where we think that maybe God's not going to meet us in this area, so I have to do it myself. Now, one of my favorite places where this word trust, batak, shows up is in Psalm 31:14. And it says, but I have trusted in you, O Lord. I said, you are my God. So trust is associated with a declaration, you are my God. So can you see how this is attachment language? It's covenant language. When we say, you are my God, what we're doing is we're answering God's original love bid for us. We're accepting his welcome home message that he says to us, I am yours and you are mine. So Batak has this image of a child clinging to a parent, trusting that parent, and accepting the care and the love and the protection of that parent. And when we think about it, that clinging, that's at the heart of what every child longs to experience. And it's at the root of what every good parent desires to give. So the last example of Batak I'll leave you with for this lesson is in Proverbs 3, verse 5, 6. And we know this one: trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. So I'll see you next week.